Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I'm 12 Kyle. Check this out on this podcast. What I want to talk about is school. More specifically, like some of the classes that we took in school. Now, I'm gonna step out on a limb and with the thought process that everyone that's listening to this podcast has gone to school at some point in time in their life, right? You probably went to elementary school. You probably went to middle school. I'm willing to bet that most of you went to high school. And I'm sure there's quite a few of you that have gone to college. But on this podcast, what I want to talk about is like there's some classes that we really hated in school. And not only that, but there were some classes that we hated, and then there were some classes that really weren't even necessary, to be honest. Now, full disclosure, coming up, I got good grades. Like I was a really, really good student. I'd probably say I was like an AB student, in elementary school. Definitely was an AB student in elementary school. In my house, um, we couldn't get C's or D's or F's. I mean, like that just it wasn't flying. My parents was like, oh, hell no. And like they made us, me and my brother, my younger brother, um, they made us like really, really put in the time and the effort and the work into our schoolwork. Um, Case in point, like unlike my friends, when I got home from school, I had to do my homework. Like I couldn't go outside, couldn't play. Like my friends, they would come home and drop their books and they go right back outside and they'd be playing football or baseball or whatever. Freeze tag. um, we couldn't do that. Like we had to come home, do our homework, make sure your homework gets checked, and then we could go outside and play. And again, this is the 80s. I'm a little bit older than most of you. So, you know, outside was where it was. Um there was no internet. So outside was the place where you needed to be. And that's the place where you wanted to be. Why? Because everything happened outside. But, you know, we had to get our work done. So the idea of the concept of getting a C or a D or an F in a class was foreign. Like that just that wasn't happening. And I remember one time I got a C on something, and my dad went off. He was like, "We don't get C's in this house," and I was like, "What do you mean?" He was like, "A C is just for average students." He was like, "You're not an average student," which is true because I wasn't. But I didn't want to hear that. I mean, like and I made the mistake of saying, "Well, Dad, Timmy got a C," and of course his retort was, "Well, Timmy's not my son. My sons won't be bringing C's in this house." So it's like a cardinal sin to get a C in any subject. So of course now I appreciate it that much more now because you know he's right. I wasn't a C student, but my parents were very strict about grades, like because they knew what kind of um, students that me and my brother were. Um, that being said, again, elementary school honor student. Uh, Things changed a little bit once I got to middle school. Now, for those of you listening, I grew up in South Carolina. My hometown is Florence, South Carolina, right? So, middle school for us was seventh and eighth grade. I know like some places like for example, like I live in Atlanta, here middle school is sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. But in Florence, in South Carolina at the time, seventh and eighth grade were middle school. So when I got to middle school, things kind of changed for me. And one, um, as far as like my grades changing, there's a couple of reasons. One, we were changing classes, so it wasn't like, you're sitting in the same class all day with the same kids and the same teacher, blah, blah, blah. Um, and then another reason why my grades changed a little bit, obviously, the elephant in the room, girls. I mean, come on, man. I mean, I'm seventh and eighth grade, man. You trying to talk to girls, man. I remember I had a girlfriend that had a Jerry curl. She was cute. She gonna kill me for this. Um, but but yeah, so things changed. Your level of focus changed, and that's not to say that I wasn't into girls in elementary school, but it's just different. I mean, like when you get to middle school, it's just you macking. You talking on the phone, and you trying to get phone numbers, and it's a different vibe. You going to school dances, and you're getting kisses, and you might get that first experience. Um, who knows? So, but I would say the biggest thing that made my grades change um, when I got to when I got to middle school was my parents got divorced, right? So going into my seventh grade year, I was no longer living with my mother and father. I was then just living with my mom. And my dad lived on the other side of town. Still was tight. Still saw him every weekend, the whole nine. But I would be lying if I said that the divorce didn't have an impact. I will never blame my grades changing on the divorce, but I think it did have an impact on me as far as how I went to or how I went about, my schoolwork. But nonetheless, you're in school again, you realize like some of this stuff just doesn't make sense. And some of this stuff is just downright stupid. So let's go back. So elementary school, right? Subjects that I may have hated. Well, I'm not gonna say may have. Subjects that I hated. There were no subjects that I hated. Like even in elementary school, like I'm not a big science fan. Um, I was more of a language arts and social studies type of kid. Those are my subjects. Excuse me. And so those are my subjects. But all of the subjects were cool. Math, science, social studies. They were all cool. So I didn't have a problem with that. Then when I got to middle school, again, we're changing classes. You got the girls, and you got a divorce, and you got a kid that's kind of trying to find his way, and the two people that mean the most to him in his life are going their separate ways, unbeknownst to him. And now all of a sudden I'm in a new house and something different, and it's just a whole different vibe. Anyway, the class that I hated in middle school was algebra. And I'm going to tell you why. Algebra back then, and even to this day, makes no sense to me whatsoever. It's useless. And I hate to be, the bearer of bad news for anybody that's in high school that's listening to this podcast, or in middle school who's listening to this podcast. But you're not going to see that shit again. I mean, you might see it in college, but after college, unless you're like an engineer or something, you'll never see this stuff again. Nobody could explain to me why X plus Y equals Z. To me, that makes no sense. X plus Y should never equal Z. X plus Y equals Z means XYZ. I mean, I know 1 plus 2 equals 3. I know 1 times 2 equals 2. I know 1 divided by 2 equals 2. But no, X plus Y does not equal Z. That makes no sense whatsoever. And I will ask anyone listening to this podcast to explain that shit to me because it makes absolutely no sense even to this day. Right. So then I get to high school. Shout out to Wilson High School in Florence, South Carolina. Um, get to Wilson, class I hated, geometry. Let me let y'all in on a little secret. I almost failed geometry. Again, I'm a great student. I'm a good, really, really good student. I'm an AB student. I almost failed geometry. In fact, I want to say I got a F for one semester or one quarter, if you will. But I think I finished with a C, right? And shout out to Mr. Green. I know he's listening. Mr. Green was my geometry teacher, one of the best teachers you could ever have uh, uh, in any at any level. He was a great teacher, but for me, I guess the best way I can describe myself as a student too also is that if I liked the subject, I was going to do well in it. If I hated a subject, good luck. But I mean, case in point, geometry, the Pythagorean theorem. What does it mean? I'll give you a second to look it up. Pythagorean theorem. I'm not going to spell it for you. Just look it up. To this day, nobody can tell me what that shit means. It means absolutely nothing. Oh, here's another one. Pi. Pi. What does pi mean? 3.14. I know it's 3.14 and then a whole bunch of decimals. I mean, a whole bunch of characters after that. But you will never see the Pythagorean theorem or pi again in your life. Never. Most jobs that you will have, again, outside of being an engineer or nuclear physicist or something like that, most jobs are going to ask you to do a couple of things: add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Honestly, that's what I do at my job every single day. And really, I don't even have to do a lot of adding and subtracting. I really just put it in the Excel spreadsheet and the computer does it for me. But that's all you'll need to do unless you're an architect or you're an engineer. And I'll be honest with y'all, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm saying it anyway. I'm so glad my kids never needed my help with math because at this level, it makes no sense. None. Nobody can explain to me what the Pythagorean theorem is or why it's beneficial or why we even had to learn about it. And here's the funny thing. Like one of my best friends, my boy Clark, shout out to Clark. Clark, he's a high school math teacher. And we went to school together at South Carolina State University. And he majored in math, right? And so, like, I remember we were having a discussion one day, and I was like, Clark, this just makes no sense. He's like, well, you can apply it in this part of life, and da 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 da. I was like, Clark, that shit don't make no. He was trying to explain. I was like, look, bro, there's nothing that you can tell me that will explain to me why the Pythagorean theorem exists or what pi actually means. It's pointless. I will never see that stuff. I'm not an engineer. I'm not an architect. I'll never see that stuff again. And I feel like I wasted my time in those classes. Now, I mentioned that I went to South Carolina State University, right? So college is a little bit different when you talk about the class that you hate. One class that I had to take that I hated, actually two classes: macroeconomics and microeconomics. I would define them for you, but I couldn't really tell you what they are. Look it up. Google is your friend. Yeah, let me tell you something, man. Macro, we used to call it macro and micro. Macro and micro, sitting in those classes being taught by professors probably was about as boring as you can get. And I had to take macro and micro because my major was marketing. So in the School of Business at South Carolina State University, you had all these prerequisite courses before you got into your major, and those were two courses, and you had to take them like one behind the other. it was best to take, I think, what did I take? Micro? I think I took micro first and I took macro. But microeconomics, stupid. Macroeconomics, stupid. It's not worth it. I will say this in fairness to me, I did get a B in the class, in both classes. But I'll be honest, man, you could probably ask me 10 questions right now, and I probably couldn't answer any of them. Because that's not, and I know, and granted, yeah, it's been 25 years since I've been out of college, but still, those classes were pointless. Um, yeah, it's again, kids. Now, if I'd become an accountant, maybe I guess, but no, I'm not. You'll never see that shit again. Um, what else? Oh, another class. World history. I hated world history. World history is the worst history. And I'm a history buff, but it's the worst history. I'm a big fan of US history. I like events. I like, world geography. Well, excuse me, I like geography, period. I can't say world geography. But nah, I'm not. World history is terrible. I mean, nobody cares about what happened in Mesopotamia in 1723. It's I don't know if it was the professors that were boring or it's just the subject matter, but I as many times as I've gone through world history and everything, I haven't come across a situation where a professor or anyone else could make it enjoyable to listen or be a part of, or be in attendance of a class for. World history is just boring to me. Again, U.S. history. I'm a much bigger fan of U.S. history. Obviously, I know our history and how we as Black people have been treated in this country, but that's another subject for another day. But the history of this country is one that cannot be and will not be erased. What's done is done. I don't care what you think about critical race theory. But that again, another subject for another day. Um, but yeah, world history is awful. It was awful. I got a C in that class, but I hated that class. Oh my gosh, I hated that class. And again, another class that I had to take for my major. I don't know why, but I had to take it. I mean, a marketing degree. I don't know why you would need to know world history, but I guess you have to take that up with South Carolina State University. Um, another class, another class that I really hated. This is gonna make you laugh, and I didn't hate it because it was a bad class, but I hated it because of the grade that I got. That class was sex education. Don't laugh. Sex ed. So I took the sex ed course as an elective. I can't remember what was I a junior? I think I was a redshirt junior. Um, Nonetheless, I took it for that particular. It was spring semester. I remember that because it was warm, and I missed class a couple of times. just kicking on my teammate. But that's beside the point. I mentioned the grade. I actually got a C in that class. Don't laugh. I got a C in that class. And to be honest, I don't know how or why I got a C in that class. Because I went to the class from what I can remember. And it was a night class. It was like Tuesday and Thursday night. So the class was a little bit longer. So it's like a 2-hour class. I mean, who wouldn't want to be sitting around, in a 2-hour class? And here's the dope part, fellas. All of the honeys were in that class. All of them. And I mean, you don't need me to tell you. Again, South Carolina State is a historically Black college and university. You don't need me to tell you, fellas, about a class like that would have all the fly honeys in it. All of them. And it was a dope class. But I got a C on it. See, I got a C in the class. And I'll never forget. I talked about this before on this podcast, and it's worth repeating. I'll never forget that the end of that semester, right? The grades went home. And in this case, everything wasn't electronic like how it is now. The grades got mailed home. So the grades, my grades for that semester actually beat me home. So I think my grades got to the house maybe like on Wednesday, and I think I came home on like Friday for the end of the year. And of course, my mom saw the grades, and my mom was like, "How the fuck did you get a C in sex ed? You don't know what you're doing?" Uh, I couldn't say nothing because I had no explanation to this day. And I'll be honest. Our professor, what was her name? Miss Green, I think. She was an older lady, and what I mean by older, she was probably close to 70. I'm convinced that she didn't know that I was in that class. I'm convinced like she gave someone else my grade because there's no way. We didn't take a lot of tests in that class. And I got good grades from what I can remember in that class. So I don't know how I ended up with a C. But coming home with a C in an elective class, for your mom to, cuss you out about getting a C in sex ed. I mean, that was really embarrassing. But I can't say I hated the class, but I hated that grade, man. Because I mean, like that affects your GPA. I mean, like there's someone right now that could look at my transcript and be like, "Yo, why you get a C in sex ed?" And I really don't have a great answer for that. But yeah, all I'm gonna say is, folks, is there's some classes that we took in school that we really, really did not need to take, and most of those classes are the classes that I hated. And trust me, if there are one or two classes that you hated, you probably didn't need to take them either. And I hope that this podcast gives you a chance to kind of sit back and think about some bullshit class that you took that you really didn't need to take, and you have not seen that material since you left school. And you know what? You won't ever will. That's going to do it for me. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast because we're dropping bonus episodes on Sundays. And also, we are dropping the episodes on YouTube. So you get the audio and you get the video. Well, in this case, for this particular podcast, it'll be on YouTube, but I don't have a haircut and I ain't feel like putting a hat on, so I didn't turn my camera on. So, but anyway, that's going to do it for me. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I'm your boy 12 Kyle. I'll catch you guys next time. 5 stacks.